My topic is on the challenges that women face, and during this time, I'll be discussing an array of topics that um, different things that women face and why they feel they have more of a disadvantage than men. Um, I had a meeting with 5 women, and it was at a place that I interned called the Stewart Youth Foundation, and the primary focus of the organization is to help troubled teens. During the time of our discussion, I asked open ended questions such as why do you all feel that you have more of a disadvantage than men, and what are ways that you feel that society puts things on you where you feel unequal or not adequate enough? And there were a bunch of different things that formulated from this discussion. I do think that the meeting was very informational and it gave me a lot of insight, and it also tied into things that we've talked about in this class, especially in regards to feminism, and to hear it first hands on and not reading text, it was definitely a different experience. One of the things that we discussed, which is also referenced in my big bibliography, was the impact of work family policies on women's employment. During this topic, women discussed how some of them, majority of them, are paid less than men, even though some of them have higher degrees and certifications than the men they work with. And a lot of them saw that as discriminatory, and I also had to agree. Um, I think right is right, and if someone is more experienced and more knowledgeable in a certain area, then that you would think they would get paid more. And I thought it was interesting that even though women may have obtained a higher degree than one of the males they worked with, they still get paid less. Another thing that came up in the meeting were that many people feel that because they're women and they're um, open to being pregnant and raising a family, that they can give their undivided attention to whatever company they're working for. So they also feel that it'll always be a higher turnover with women. And the women in my group have all been working at the Stewart Youth Foundation for over 5 years. They've never missed a day. All of them said occasionally they might have to take a personal day or something for one of their kids, but it's not excessive to the point where um, they've missed so many days that they need to be treated differently. One of the women in particular, her name was Patty, mentioned that her and her husband work as a team. So if something were to happen to the child while they were at school, the teacher knows to alternate between which parent to call. So it's not primarily on one parent, or it's not always that parent's responsibility to always stop what they're doing or stop work or whatever the case may be to come pick up the child. So I think if society can kind of get into everyone is equal and everyone should have the same responsibility and it shouldn't weigh more on one person, that the stigmas of feminism in general will decrease. Another policy I discussed was the family supportive policies, and it talks about sponsored child care. And we also talked about marriage promotion policy and family inequality. And a lot of women in the group or in the meeting also discussed that they value being married, and they were also taught from a young age that the man is supposed to provide. Out of the 5 women, I would say about 2 of them told me that they were actually the primary breadwinners in the relationship, and it does make it difficult for their husbands to accept that because it's been instilled in them that they are always supposed to be the provider for the family. I also discussed domestic violence, and during this session, there were some women that came forth saying that they experienced domestic violence in one of their previous relationships, and they told me that because their family unit was dysfunctional, even though they know they deserved better, they wanted to maintain the family unit so that their children can grow up in a two-family household, opposed to visiting mom one day and then another day you're going to visit their father. Um, I ask more open-ended questions, such as, do you think you deserve more? And why do you choose to settle? And there are also alternatives. You might meet another man 2 or 3 years down the line who can still be a great father to your kids and treat you with the utmost respect. And a lot of them still were stuck in their ways in reference to they wanted their children to have both of their parents at all times. And even though that can come off as noble, it still can also transpire to settling. We also talked about the domestic abuse for women and the impacts it have on them, which goes back to the job market. Women tend to be more emotional than men. So if you experience these type of traumatic events, typically it'll cause you to call off work or take personal time off, which goes back to what the employers think in the first place, which is women are not as dependable as men. And even though it's a negative stigma, it seems to stick everywhere because of the different accolades that occur in life. And granted, there are some men who are just as emotional as women, but it seems to be more of a prominent issue when it comes to discussing the different things that occur in the workplace or um, in the home. The meeting was very informative, and I thought that we discussed a lot of topics that triggered great conversation. There was a lot of dialogue. There wasn't anyone in the meeting that held back, and everyone gave their honest opinions on a lot of different matters. We also discussed media relations and how women are portrayed in the media. And as we all have seen on television, women are typically more sexualized than men, and men are coming off as the aggressors in the situation, but they're not made to look degrading when it comes to media. They're just made to look strong. And the women in the group also um, brought up the subject that they don't understand why men are not looked at as over sexualized on television, and why it has to solely focus on one group because of their gender. We also discussed another topic, which was assessing the impact of community marriage policies. And during this session, the women in the group just gave different opinions on how they view marriage. And 4 out of the 5 said that they only strive for marriage because their mothers instilled in them at a young age that you're not a woman until you're married and you have children. And there was one lady in the group, and her name was Patricia, and she stated that she's not married and she doesn't have children, and right now she's just career driven, and she wants to experience motherhood and being a wife at a later stage because she feels she's still young and she wants to explore life. And I do think that society is becoming more accepting that there are a lot of women out here who are very educated and are capable of running companies just like men, and they too are very hungry for their career and they want to experience it all. And I think by seeing more women like that will help decrease the stigma that women are not adequate to men and that they should be treated of lesser value. I thought this experience overall was very positive and uplifting. I also thought the topics that were discussed were very thought provoking, and it allowed me to see how women actually feel about all the subjects that are always discussed in many different classes, and which is feminism, and how they feel they have not been treated equally. Um, and I do think that overall this experience was great for me because, as I said before, it allowed me to have insight that I did not have in the beginning. And I'm more aware now of what women actually feel when it comes to how they feel inadequate to men. And it's definitely different than the readings that we've done in this class, even though they give me a good insight and they help me to think um, about this topic. It was very different to hear this come from a woman's mouth and how they feel that society is always going to be like this and they're not open to change. Um, we pretty much stayed on topic. There wasn't any going off topic because all the topics that I chose to talk about, they created so much dialogue that we had to cut some topics short to get through all of them. And overall, all of the women told me that they enjoyed the experience and they were glad that they were able to make sure that their voices were heard. Thank you.